I want to start today by asking you to visualize something. It's a, it's a question that sounds incredibly simple, maybe even a little childish.
But it's really the fundamental question, isn't it?
Right. It's essentially the operating system of our entire lives, yet hardly anyone actually knows how it works.
Yeah.
And that question is, where does money come from?
Yeah, and if you go out and ask 10 people on the street that exact question, I guarantee 9 of them are going to give you the exact same answer.
They're going to picture a giant factory.
Exactly.
Giant rolls of paper,
Yeah.
green ink everywhere, massive metal plates stamping down. Like the government needs money to pay for things, so they just turn on the printing press.
Whir, buzz, chop.
Yeah, and out comes a fresh stack of $100 bills.
It's the classic Hollywood montage version of economics. I mean, it makes for a great visual, but it's almost entirely fiction.
Which brings us to our source for today's deep dive. We are looking at a document called Modern Money Mechanics. And it basically takes that whole Hollywood printing press image, crumples it up, and throws it right in the trash.
It really does. And I think it's important to note, right off the bat, this isn't some fringe conspiracy blog post we scraped off the dark web.
No, this is the literal source code. It's a manual that was originally produced by the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago.
Right. You can think of it as a workbook.
Yeah.
Like a blue-collar, nuts-and-bolts manual for central bankers and economists. Very dense, very technical. But if you actually take the time to read it, it completely demystifies this whole idea that money is simply printed into existence.
In fact, it argues that the physical printing press is a tiny, almost irrelevant part of how money actually enters the world.
A rounding error, really, in the grand scheme of things.
So that is our mission today. We're going to break down the actual mechanics of the U.S. financial system. We're going to get into the weeds of fractional reserve banking and something called the money multiplier.
And fair warning to you listening right now, once you actually understand this mechanism, you are never going to look at your bank account balance the same way again.
It really shifts your entire paradigm.
It totally changes your perception of what value really is.
So let's just get straight into it. The workbook starts with a definition. And right away, they throw us a curveball. They define money, but they aren't talking about the $20 bill in your wallet.
No, because if you define money strictly as coins and paper bills, you are missing the vast, vast majority of the actual economy. The manual focuses on a measure called M1.
M1.
Right. Now, M1 does include currency, sure, the physical stuff, but the heavy lifter in the M1 money supply is what they call transaction deposits.
Which is really just a fancy technical way of saying checking accounts.
Checking accounts, NOW accounts, demand deposits, basically any number sitting on a screen that you can immediately use to, buy a sandwich or pay your rent.
And the workbook actually uses a snapshot from way back in December 1991 to illustrate this point.
Which is fascinating when you think about it.
Yeah, because even back then, way before Venmo, before Apple Pay, before everyone was just tapping their phones, transaction deposits made up nearly 70% of the total money stock.
70%.
So almost 3/4 of the money supply wasn't physical at all. It was just accounting entries.
Exactly. It was just data on a bank ledger. And that realization leads to the first big philosophical hurdle the text asks us to clear.
Which is?
Well, if money isn't gold and it's mostly not even paper, then what actually makes it valuable?
Yeah, the text is shockingly blunt about this. I actually wrote down the exact quote because it felt so stark coming from the Federal Reserve. It says, in the United States, neither paper currency nor deposits have value as commodities.
And it's entirely true. I mean, think about a physical dollar bill. It's just a blend of cotton and linen. Intrinsically, as a physical object, it's worth maybe a fraction of a cent.
And a bank deposit is even less than that.
Right. A bank deposit is literally just magnetic patterns on a server somewhere. It has zero intrinsic value.
So why does the barista hand me a cup of coffee when I tap my plastic card on their little machine?
Confidence. Just confidence. That's it. The manual explains that money derives its value entirely from its scarcity in relation to its usefulness. It only has value because you and I and the barista all share a collective confidence that it can be exchanged for real goods and services later on.
It's a trust-based system, but modern money mechanics doesn't just, leave it at trust us. They actually give us the origin story of how this trust was built.
Yeah, they take us all the way back to the 17th century.
The story of the goldsmiths.
This is such a great anecdote. It's really the aha moment for understanding modern banking. It perfectly explains how humanity transitioned from money is a physical thing to money is just a promise.
Okay, so set the scene for us. Walk us through it.
All right, so go back a few hundred years. You are a wealthy merchant, and you have a lot of gold. Now, gold is heavy.
Super heavy.
It's soft, and more importantly, it's really dangerous to carry around in a sack because someone is going to rob you.
Obviously.
So you take your gold to the local goldsmith. Because the goldsmith works with precious metals, he naturally has a massive, secure iron vault.
Right.
You deposit your physical gold into his vault for safekeeping, and he writes you a paper receipt.
Basically a claim check. Like when you go to a fancy restaurant and check your coat.
Exactly like a coat check. One ticket equals one coat. One paper receipt equals 1 pound of gold sitting in the vault.
And at this stage, this is what we'd call 100% reserve banking.
Correct. Every single piece of paper out in the world represents something physically sitting in the dark, locked away.
But then human nature kicks in. Convenience takes over.
Right, because people quickly realized that trading the actual gold was a massive hassle. If I owe you a pound of gold for some sheep, why should I walk all the way to the vault, withdraw the heavy metal, haul it over to your house, just so you can haul it back to the exact same vault the next day?
I'll just hand you the piece of paper, the receipt.
Yeah, exactly. I just hand you the claim check. And eventually, those paper receipts just become the money. People trade them in the market, and the actual physical gold just sits there in the vault.
Gathering dust.
Gathering dust. And the goldsmiths, who are, business-minded people, they start to notice something incredibly crucial.
They realize nobody is actually coming to get the gold.
Almost never. At least not all at the same time. The vault is always mostly full.
So the gears start turning in the goldsmith's head.
Right. He thinks, I have 100 pounds of gold sitting in here doing nothing. But I have all these merchants coming in every day asking for loans.
So he lends them the gold?
Well, he could, but he realizes he doesn't even need to move the metal. He can just write out a new paper receipt.
Wait, a receipt for gold that doesn't actually exist?
A receipt that claims to be backed by gold. If he has 100 pounds of real gold, but he issues paper receipts for 200 pounds of gold, he has quite literally just created money out of thin air.
Just by writing it down.
Yes, and he lends those extra newly created receipts out to people and charges them interest on it.
And as long as everyone holding a receipt doesn't show up on the exact same Tuesday demanding their physical metal,
the system works flawlessly. The goldsmith effectively transforms from a guy with a secure box into a bank. He is keeping fractional reserves of gold against the total amount of paper receipts circulating in the town.
And that right there is the birth of the system we use today. Fractional reserve banking.
It is the exact same DNA. The only difference is that today, we obviously don't use gold.
Right.
We use reserves that are provided by the Federal Reserve, and commercial banks don't issue physical paper receipts anymore. They issue electronic deposits. But the core mechanic...
Creating more claims than there are actual reserves in the vault.
Exactly. That core mechanic is identical.
Okay, so let's fast forward from the goldsmiths and look at the modern machine. The engine of creation, as the workbook details it. Because I think, despite everything we just said, people still kind of fall back on the belief that the government is just printing cash to pay its bills.
It's a hard image to shake.
It is. But the process described in modern money mechanics is way more elegant and, frankly, a lot more confusing.
It is definitely more complex. It's essentially a giant asset swap. Let's actually walk through the specific step-by-step example from the text.
Let's do it.
Let's say the Federal Reserve decides the economy is a bit sluggish and needs a boost. They want to inject new money into the system.
So they don't turn on the printing press. What do they actually do?
They go to what is called the open market. They find a private dealer who currently holds U.S. government securities treasury bills.
Okay.
And the Fed steps in and buys, for the sake of easy math, $10,000 worth of those treasury bills from the dealer.
Okay. That seems like a simple transaction. The Fed gets the T-bills. The dealer gets paid 10 grand. But here is the multi-trillion-dollar question. Where did the Fed get the $10,000 to pay the dealer?
And here's the magic trick. The manual explicitly says the Fed pays for those securities with an electronic check drawn on itself.
Drawn on itself. Wait, if I write a check drawn on myself and I don't already have the funds in my account, I go to jail for fraud. That's a bounce check.
You certainly would. But the Fed is the central bank. It writes the rules of the game. When the Fed writes that check, it isn't pulling money out of some massive savings account. It is creating the money in the very act of paying the dealer.
It creates a liability.
Exactly. A liability creation out of thin air.
So the dealer takes this magic check from the Fed and deposits it into their regular commercial bank. Let's just call it Bank A.
Okay, Follow the bouncing ball carefully here. Bank A now receives a $10,000 deposit. This enters their accounting books as a liability because technically they owe that 10 grand to the dealer whenever he wants it.
But it also enters as an asset.
Right. It's an asset in the form of reserves held at the Fed.
But Bank A is a business. They are in the business of making profit for their shareholders. They don't want $10,000 just sitting in their reserve account doing absolutely nothing.
Precisely. They want to put it to work. But by law, they cannot lend all of it out. They are required to keep a fraction of it safe.
Fractional reserve.
Exactly. Now, the workbook uses a flat 10% requirement just to make the math easy to follow. So under those rules, Bank A has to keep $1,000 locked up as a reserve.
Which leaves them with $9,000. And the workbook calls this leftover amount excess reserves.
And this right here is the exact moment where commercial money is born. Bank A has 9 grand in excess reserves. They find a borrower. Let's say you walk in because you want to buy a used car.
Okay, I need a car.
Bank A looks at your credit, agrees to the loan, and decides to lend you that $9,000. Now, listen to this part very carefully. The bank does not go into the back room and bring you out cash.
They don't hand me a silver briefcase full of $100 bills.
No. They simply log into their computer and type a 9 followed by 3 zeros into your checking account. They credit your account.
And at that exact millisecond.
The total money supply of the United States just increased.
That's crazy.
Think about it. Before you walked in for that car loan, there was only the dealer's $10,000 in the system. Now there's the dealer's 10 grand plus your new 9 grand.
So there's $19,000 of spending power.
Exactly. Bank A created $9,000 of brand new money just by typing it onto a screen.
They basically monetized my promise to pay them back.
That's a perfect way to phrase it. But the machine doesn't stop there. You take that $9,000 and you write a check to the guy selling the used car.
Okay.
The car seller takes your check and deposits it at his bank. Let's call it Bank B.
So now Bank B has $9,000 of fresh deposits sitting on their books.
And the exact same rules apply to Bank B. They have to keep 10% of that deposit in reserve.
10% of $9,000. So they keep $900.
Which leaves Bank B with $8,100 of new excess reserves. And what do you think they do with it?
They lend it right back out.
Boom. They find another borrower, type the numbers into a computer, and another $8,100 of new money enters the economy.
And then that money gets spent, deposited into Bank C. Bank C keeps 10%, lends out the rest.
Over and over and over, it cascades down through the entire commercial banking system.
It's a geometric progression, and what I love is that the workbook actually does the math for the theoretical limit of this cascade. If you let this mathematical loop run all the way down to the very last penny, what does that initial $10,000 injection from the Fed actually turn into?
It turns into $100,000 of total bank deposits.
A literal 10x multiplier.
Yes. The banking system acts as a massive amplifier. It has effectively taken $10,000 of base money, this high-powered money injected by the Fed, and multiplied it into $100,000 of everyday commercial money.
Which implies something pretty staggering. It means that nearly all the money you and I use every single day
is debt. It is entirely backed by loans. If everyone in the country magically paid off all their debts tomorrow morning, every mortgage, every car loan, every credit card balance, the money supply would essentially vanish.
That is a genuinely terrifying thought to hold on to.
Yep.
But let's put a pin in the existential dread for a second. If this engine can spin up and multiply money like this, surely it has brakes, right? It can spin down.
Oh, absolutely. The Fed can absolutely hit the brakes. The manual refers to this process as contraction.
So how does contraction work?
It's just the exact reverse of the expansion process. If the Fed looks at the economy and thinks, okay, there is way too much money flying around, maybe inflation is getting too hot.
Which we've certainly seen recently.
Right. So instead of buying securities, the Fed sells securities.
Okay, so they sell a treasury bill to a dealer, which means the dealer has to pay the Fed.
Exactly. And when the dealer writes a check to pay the Fed, that money leaves the commercial banking system. It gets sucked out of Bank A and disappears back into the Fed's ledger. It is effectively destroyed. The reserves are drained.
And suddenly the commercial banks are in trouble.
Right, because Bank A looks at its books the next morning and says, uh-oh, we just lost a chunk of our reserves. We are short on our 10% legal requirement.
So they have to scramble to fix their ratio.
They scramble. They immediately stop making new loans. If they have loans that can be called in, they call them in. They sell off other investments.
Shrinking the money supply just as fast as the loans originally expanded it.
Exactly. It extinguishes the deposit money in reverse order.
So the Fed is really just managing the level of liquid in this giant tank. And the workbook actually outlines 3 main tools they use to manage that liquid. We've mostly been talking about the first one, open market operations.
Buying and selling those securities.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That seems to be the daily driver, the normal steering wheel.
it is. That happens constantly in the background. But they have 2 other specific levers that are a bit more dramatic. The second tool the book mentions is the discount window.
Which, I have to admit, sounds like the part of a department store where you go to buy a dented washing machine. But I'm assuming it's a bit more complex than that.
Just a bit. The discount window is a facility where commercial banks can borrow reserves directly from the Federal Reserve if they find themselves in a temporary jam.
So they just get a short-term loan.
Right. And the Fed charges them an interest rate on those borrowed reserves, which is known as the discount rate.
But the source text actually mentions that banks really hate doing this. They try to avoid it.
Yeah, in the banking world, going to the discount window is kind of the walk of shame.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Because if you have to borrow directly from the Fed, it signals to the rest of the market that you aren't managing your own reserves very well. You can't borrow from other commercial banks. So the Fed uses it more as a safety valve to prevent panics rather than a primary tool to push money into the system.
Got it. Okay, and the third tool? Because this one feels like the nuclear option when you read about it.
It really is. It's the reserve requirement itself. Remember how we kept using 10% in our car loan example?
Yeah, 10% stays in the vault.
Well, the Fed has the statutory power to just change that number.
So what happens if they change it? Even by just a tiny bit, like dropping the requirement from 10% down to 8%.
The effect is seismic. If the Fed suddenly lowers the requirement to 8%, overnight, billions and billions of dollars that were legally locked up as required reserves are suddenly reclassified as excess reserves.
So the banks wake up and find massive amounts of free money that they can legally start lending out immediately.
Exactly. The multiplier potential of the entire country goes through the roof in an instant.
And if they do the opposite, if they raise the requirement,
Total panic. If they raise it from 10 to 12%, almost every bank in the country is suddenly completely underwater on their ratios.
they don't have enough reserve.
They have a massive deficit, so they have to slam on the brakes, stop all lending immediately, and hoard cash just to get compliant.
Which crashes the money supply.
It's so blunt and so violently powerful that the workbook explicitly notes they rarely ever change it for active policy. It's like trying to perform delicate brain surgery with a running chainsaw.
Okay, so we've built this perfectly tuned theoretical machine in our heads. The Fed puts in $1, the machine churns out 10. The Fed takes out $1, the machine eats 10. It's very clean.
Theoretically.
Right, theoretically. Because modern money mechanics spends a very long time explaining that the real world is messy.
Very messy.
There's a lot of friction in the gears of this machine. Independent factors that the Fed can't totally control.
Yeah, that 10x multiplier we discussed is strictly the theoretical maximum. In reality, there are leakages everywhere. And one of the most fascinating sections of the book is about a concept called float.
This part really stuck out to me because it feels so beautifully analog. They actually use an example of the weather affecting the national money supply.
Yes, you have to remember, when this workbook was originally conceived, physical paper checks were flown in canvas bags across the country every single night.
Right.
So float is essentially money that exists in 2 places at the exact same time due to processing delays.
Explain how that happens.
Okay, if you write me a check for $1,000 and I deposit it at my bank immediately credits my account.
So you have the money.
I have the money. But it might take 2 full days for that physical piece of paper to travel to your bank so they can actually debit your account.
So for those 48 hours, the banking system shows $1,000 in your account, and it still shows that same $1,000 sitting in my account.
Exactly. The system temporarily registers more reserves than it actually has. It's phantom money.
And the workbook explicitly mentions that if a bad snowstorm rolls in and grounds the cargo planes carrying the checks,
The float skyrockets. The Federal Reserve literally has to monitor the national weather report. If planes are grounded, they might actually have to step in and sell securities just to drain that fake excess money out of the system until the snow clears and the planes can fly again.
that is just incredible. The weather dictates short-term monetary policy. But there are other drains too, right? Drains that come from everyday people. The manual calls them currency drains.
This is a huge, huge factor. The whole 10x multiplier effect relies entirely on the money staying inside the banking system. Deposit, loan, deposit, loan.
An unbroken chain.
But what happens if you get a loan, take it out in physical cash, and just keep it?
Like taking money out for a night on the town. Or, sticking it in a jar under your bed.
Or the exact example the text uses, holiday shopping. When millions of people go to the ATM and withdraw $100 in physical cash, that is $100 of base reserves physically leaving the banking system.
It breaks the chain.
Completely breaks it. That $100 in your pocket can no longer be used by the bank to support $1,000 in created deposits.
So when everyone rushes to the ATM right before Christmas?
The banking system's overall capacity to create money actually shrinks. The Fed knows this, so they have to anticipate human behavior. They routinely pump extra reserves into the system every December just to offset the physical cash people carry around for gifts.
And then they pull it back out in January when people deposit the cash back in. Now, there is one last slippage factor the manual talks about, and I think this one feels incredibly relevant to the economic crises we've lived through recently. We assumed in our perfect car loan example that Bank A immediately found a borrower and lent out its excess reserves.
Right.
But they don't legally have to, do they?
And this is the critical flaw in the whole money printer go brrr logic that you see online. The workbook is very careful to call it excess reserves.
Yeah.
The Fed can create the capacity to lend. They can fill the commercial bank's account with billions of dollars in fresh reserves.
But they can't force the bank officer to actually sign a loan approval for a customer.
It's the old pushing on a string metaphor.
Right.
If the banks are scared, maybe there's a recession looming, or they look at borrowers and think, these people are going to default, the bank will just sit on that cash.
Wow.
They will keep it as excess reserves.
And if they just sit on it?
The multiplier is exactly 1. No new commercial money is created. The entire chain breaks at step 1.
Which explains a lot about recent history. In 2008, and even more so in 2020, the Fed pumped trillions of dollars of reserves into the system. But we didn't see immediate, runaway, Weimar-style hyperinflation in consumer goods right away.
Because the money largely got stuck inside the commercial banks. They didn't lend it out at a 10x ratio.
It totally reframes the role of the Federal Reserve. They aren't actually the driver of the economic car. They're just the gas station attendant.
That's a really great way to put it. They can fill the tank to the brim, but the commercial banks and the everyday borrowers are the ones who actually have to decide to step on the gas and drive.
So let's zoom out for a minute. We've stripped this machine down to the studs. We know it runs on debt. We know it multiplies through a shared confidence. And we know it's constantly subjected to things like winter snowstorms and holiday shopping.
Yeah.
What does this all mean for the person listening right now? Why does this technical blue-collar workbook actually matter to their daily life?
I think it matters primarily because it helps you decode the world around you. When you turn on the news and hear jargon like quantitative easing or expanding the Fed's balance sheet, it's not just noise anymore.
You know exactly what they're doing.
It means the Fed is buying assets to force base reserves into the commercial banking system, desperately hoping the banks will lend it out and trigger that multiplier.
It also fundamentally changes how I view my own savings.
Yeah.
I really used to think of my savings account as a tiny personal vault where my money just sat safe and sound.
A lot of people do.
But now I realize it's just a liability on a ledger. It is a promise the bank has made to me, which is entirely supported by the loans they made to somebody else.
It really highlights the interconnectivity of it all. Your personal financial stability is mathematically tied to the guy down the street paying his mortgage and the business across town paying its payroll loan. The entire system is just a massive web of mutual promises.
And that leads us to the provocative thought I want to end on today, because this really got under my skin. We started this deep dive by asking where money comes from. We found out, mathematically, it comes from debt.
Right, from the expansion of loans.
But the manual stressed right at the very beginning that money's value comes from scarcity.
And there is the ultimate paradox.
It is a massive paradox. The system is mechanically designed to multiply. It is designed to take one base dollar and turn it into 10 commercial dollars. If the system works perfectly as intended, money naturally becomes less scarce over time.
It has to expand.
But if money becomes less scarce, doesn't it fundamentally become less valuable?
It really forces you to ask a highly uncomfortable question about reality. Is the money sitting in your pocket a fixed store of value like a physical gold coin used to be?
Or is it something else?
Or is it just a share of stock in the confidence of the U.S. economy?
Because if the whole machine strictly relies on the collective belief that all these expanding debts can eventually be paid back,
Then, what happens when the math breaks? What happens when the pile of debt grows faster than the real physical economy that is supposed to support it? Modern money mechanics describes an incredibly brilliant, efficient, and powerful machine.
it really is a marvel of financial engineering.
But reading it also makes you realize that the primary fuel of that machine isn't gold, it isn't oil, it's just trust.
And trust is the one commodity the Federal Reserve absolutely cannot print.
No, they can't. And that is a very heavy thought to walk away with.
It is the ultimate takeaway from the source.
Absolutely.
Well, we're going to let you chew on that paradox for a bit. Thank you for taking the plunge with us today into the engine room of the economy.
It was a fascinating ride. Always a pleasure.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive.